Let's talk about miscellaneous income. Income that typically falls to line 21 on the federal 1040. With the new forms this year, it's actually on Schedule 1, line 21. This is where you tend to put things that don't fit, income that doesn't fit somewhere else on the return. A lot of times, this income could appear on a Form 1099 miscellaneous, and if you have that form from the taxpayer, you can ask him, how did this income arise? What is it? Is it royalties? Is it non-employee compensation for some work they do? Is it other types of income? Sometimes it could be unusual, but you have to sort of ask those questions to determine what's the appropriate way to enter this income into the return. A note, if they have a 1099 miscellaneous, you do need to enter it into the return. And you need to try and classify it correctly as to where it belongs on the return. You may end up having to report it on a different line than a tax slayer would try to assign it to. So it's important to know what to do. Of course, if you have any questions, you can talk to your site coordinator to get his buy-in of what your thoughts are. On a 1099 miscellaneous, you usually see rents in box 1. If it's there, you typically create a Schedule E. Royalties, the same way, you go to Schedule E. Sometimes an exception would be if that's their main business or their type of business, you might have to go to a Schedule C. Other income is what we're dealing with here. If you find something in box 3, it typically will end up on line 21. And the other big one you see on this form is box 7, which is non-employee compensation. Note that goes not to line 21. That's considered income, which typically goes to line 12. Just a couple notes about that self-employment income. That's defined as engaged in a trade or business with regularity for income or profit. It usually requires activity. It's not passive. And it could be fringe benefits for employees. Sometimes they receive it in box 7 of a 1099 miscellaneous. We mention this because sometimes the taxpayer will try and convince you that they're not self-employed. If you have any questions about that, you again should confer with your site coordinator. I think it's fairly rare that a box 7 should not be considered self-employment. It typically is exactly that, and it belongs there. Again, here's a picture of a 1099 miscellaneous. I apologize, I'm using a 2017 version. But again, you have rents, royalties, other income. Was any federal income tax withheld? Here's your non-employee compensation. Those are the big items you typically see. And then you have the name of the person paying it and their tax ID number. So if the taxpayer has this form, you must enter it in the return, just like if it was a W-2. Now, other than the box 3 on a 1099 miscellaneous, there may be other miscellaneous type of income that aren't on a form necessarily, or on a different kind of form. For example, scholarships and grants that have a taxable portion to them. Cancellation of credit card debt is considered income, which you'll find that a lot of times your taxpayer does not understand that. But they could have a form showing that debt was forgiven. If they have an HSA, Health Savings Account distribution, and they didn't use it for medical reasons, you'll find that that falls onto line 21. Long-term care distributions, rarely, but on occasion it's possible that a taxpayer got a long-term care distribution and it's not eligible to be tax-free for whatever reason. We're not going to go into those details in this session. That's something, again, you can confer with your site coordinator. What you may see more typically, you might see jury duty pay, or compensation, I should say. Poll workers get paid. Gambling winnings that are not on a gambling form. You know, if they go to a casino, they usually get a document showing their winnings, but sometimes they'll win money that they'll tell you about. They didn't get a form. So those go on line 21 as well. Okay, let's start with, let's say we have a 1099 miscellaneous with a value in box 3. We go to Income and Tax layer and we select Form 1099 Miscellaneous. And you key in the information for that, who it belongs to, the payer's tax ID number, the name of the payer, and then we could scroll down on the form and you put in the other income, box 3. It's fairly easy, straightforward, and now you have an entry and it shows it's carried to line 21. That's fairly straightforward. And you see, again, this is the previous form. This would actually be on this, again, on the Schedule 1, line 21. You'll see $1,000 of income. Okay, let's take an example where you don't have a form. They told you they have income that they received, let's say jury duty pay. So we would go, in this case, instead of the 1099 miss, we'll select other income. Other income not reported elsewhere. And it's a fairly straightforward entry. You select who it belongs to, what it is, and the amount of the other income. That's a very easy entry to make, and then that'll populate to line 21. Now let's say we mentioned earlier you could have a scholarship. Typically in our case it would maybe be a scholarship, a grant of a dependent, and part of it becomes taxable. We select other income. In this case, other compensation, fringe benefits, Takes us a few clicks to get there. And now we can key in a taxable amount for the taxpayer or spouse and continue. And that will appear on line 21. Okay, let's look at cancellation of credit card debt. Again, we go to other income. In this time we select cancellation of debt. Cancellation of debt. The taxpayer typically would have this form 1099-C, and from that you would fill in the information and hit continue. So those are fairly easy entries when you're listing line 21, income for line 21. Now, if they receive a 1099 miscellaneous and the income is in box 7 and you believe it is not self-employment, you probably should again talk to your site coordinator and get his agreement on that, because that's a fairly important decision to make. So what you do, you still have to follow the process of entering the 1099 miscellaneous with the amount in box 7, because that's what the form says that you have. But when you enter the 1099 miscellaneous, it will then ask you to create a Schedule C because of the box 7 amount. And then you enter expenses in the Schedule C to equal the income, so you end up with a 0 amount of net income. Now, to get the income in the return, you follow the same process as we looked at earlier for other income not reported elsewhere, and that will put this income on line 21. Okay. So in this case, we're going to add a 1099 miscellaneous. We're going to key in the information. We scroll down, and that we put the amount in box 7. Again, that will create a Schedule C. And then you select other expenses of the same amount as the income you put in, and that will zero out the income. Then you go in, again, you select other income not reported elsewhere, and you put it in as other income. In this case, we determined that this is really hobby income. The guy was not doing this business to make a profit. It was just a hobby for him, so you agreed to put it into line 21, income. Please note on hobby income, if he has any expenses, that kind of shoots his chance to claim any expenses. You can claim expenses on a Schedule C, but you can't claim expenses on a line 21. And with the elimination of some of the expenses on Schedule A, that may limit his opportunity to claim any expenses. But you still end up with the income now goes on line 21 rather than up here on business income. Now, another exception is if you get a 1099 miscellaneous and there's an amount in box 3, so you know it's going to go to line 21, but
for whatever reason, you've determined that it's really not taxable. It's there, but it's not it shouldn't be taxable. You go through the same procedures we did to create the 1099 miscellaneous with an amount in box 3. And what you do then is make a second entry. You go into other income not reported elsewhere and put in a negative amount in this case. So we've created the schedule, or the 1099 miss, and entered the amount in box 3, which put the income on line 21. Now to take it out, we hit other income not reported elsewhere, and we key in this entry with a negative entry in this case. We want to take it out of line 21. This is the only way we can take it out of line 21. We enter a negative amount. That takes the income out. I know those are a couple exceptions we covered. You hopefully won't run into that. If you do, work with your site coordinator. Now, we've tried to do a chart of some of these income items and carry them through to not only to the federal, but to the Pennsylvania and the local York County taxes. As you can see, there's some of the more popular ones: jury duty pay, poll worker, and typically in a 1099 miscellaneous box 3. As we've shown, they should go to line 21, and they should go to line 1 on the PA and line 1 on the local return. Here's the prizes and awards won. This is something we rarely see. These are prizes and awards not involved with gambling, not involving a wager. They're not taxable, PA and local. This is another one we rarely see. Pennsylvania retraining payments go to line 21, but they're not taxable to Pennsylvania or local. Gambling winnings, a little bit different. They go on line 20. We don't have a Form W-2G showing the gambling winnings. We just have something that the client taxpayer tells us they won $500 bingo or something. You put that on line 21, and in Pennsylvania you create a Schedule T. Now in Pennsylvania, you want to note Pennsylvania does allow you to offset that with gambling losses. So if they have, or if they are aware of their losses, you can include that on Schedule T. On federal, you don't have that opportunity any longer. So it's Pennsylvania that's affected. Let's see, taxable. We talked a little bit about these distributions. Go on line 21 if there's a taxable portion. They're only taxable to PA and local if the taxpayer took a deduction in a previous year. If they took an HSA deduction on the Pennsylvania return on a previous year, they might have to include the taxable portion in their income for this year. Again, if you have questions, you should go to your coordinator on that. Hobby income is taxable. Cancellation of credit card debt, fortunately, is not taxable in Pennsylvania and local. Again, taxable portions of education savings accounts are only taxable to Pennsylvania if they took, say they had this is a 529 distribution. If they took a 529 exclusion or deduction on a previous return, then you might have to claim it as income. One thing we see locally, Caterpillar, United Auto Workers income reported on 1099 miscellaneous box 7. That's one of the ones we had an exception earlier how to handle that. That's really not self-employment income. That goes to line 21, but it's not taxable to PA and local. Although we have submitted requests to TaxSlayer to automate this process, at this point in time, income items that appear on that line 21 of the federal return and should be taxable to Pennsylvania are not being passed automatically. So you have to make a manual entry on the Pennsylvania return. So in the PA return, you go to Income, Subject to Tax, Miscellaneous Taxable Income, 1099 Miscellaneous. And in there, you create a 1099 Miscellaneous for the combined total of the income that is taxable PA. So if you have several items on line 21, say you have jury duty pay and poll worker pay, you have multiple things that are taxable to PA. You'd have to add them together because Pennsylvania only allows you to create one 1099 miscellaneous. And of course, ignore those items that are not taxable, like credit card cancellation of debt is not taxable to PA, so you can ignore that. Now, some items, as you noted in our earlier chart, are taxable to PA, but they're not taxable on line 1. They're taxable on another line of the PA return. Those also have to be manually entered at this time. So if you have gambling winnings on line 21, you don't create a 1099 miscellaneous in the Pennsylvania return. You go to gambling winnings on the Pennsylvania return. And if you have the taxable, that should be HSA distributions or long-term care distributions, you select interest and dividend income and stick the taxable portion in there. And the same thing for education savings accounts. You select the interest and dividend income under the income subject to tax menu in the Pennsylvania return. So that's how you put it in at this time. Now again, this may change depending if they put some of these changes in, but at the moment that's the way it looks. And that's the final presentation. Hopefully I didn't confuse anyone. Hopefully that can answer a lot of your questions. Thank you.